Is everybody listening? Because that's what I'll be discussing today. How do we listen? I'm currently taking an interpersonal communication class, and one of the chapters we studied focuses on active listening, which is a foundation of communication. This discussion will particularly focus on the various listening styles and their advantages and disadvantages, active listening and its barriers, and how to improve active listening. So I hope you're listening, because here we go. The process of listening itself actually involves 6 stages. Now, before I read this chapter, I always thought that listening was hearing, nodding your head, and then responding. That's it. In reality, effective listening is broken down into hearing, understanding, interpreting, evaluating, remembering, and then responding. The way we listen is known as a listening style, and there are 4 of these listening styles: people, content, action, and time-oriented listeners. People-oriented listeners are concerned with others' emotions. Their goal is to form a relationship. They tend to be empathetic, and other people often perceive them as being caring. Their faults, however, include a tendency to be drawn into unhealthy relationships, an inability to discriminate, and an impaired sense of judgment because they're too empathetic. Content-oriented listeners look to be intellectually stimulated from a conversation. They're interested more in what's being said rather than who's saying it. This in itself may seem like a fault, but in fact, they're just focusing on the facts and they're being cautious before they respond. A drawback in this listening style is that they may ignore others' opinions because they want you to get to the point. Action-oriented listeners want clear and to-the-point messages. They look for plans of action and ask, "So what?" The problem with an action-oriented listener is that they might rush the speaker or reject their unrealistic ideas. Lastly, time-oriented listeners prefer short conversations. They differ from action-oriented listeners in that they care less about the content and more about how long it takes you to get to the point. An obvious issue with this style is that they are likely to interrupt if the conversation is consuming too much of their time, and for this reason they're sometimes perceived as uninterested. After hearing all 4 of these styles, what kind of listener do you think you are? I see myself as a people-oriented listener, but to be an active listener, you have to know how to use all 4 of these styles appropriately. But fear not, active listening is a skill that anyone can learn. To be an active listener, you must listen with all of your senses rather than just passively hearing the message and nodding your head. But like with every skill, there are barriers, and those can keep us from using them successfully. These barriers include selective listening, pseudo-listening, and aggressive listening. Selective listening involves only listening to part of the conversation. You predominantly listen to what you believe are the most important parts, and then you risk missing all the other relevant details. To conquer this barrier, you need not to try to listen to all of the information, but instead work at it slowly. Pseudo-listening is exactly what it sounds like, fake listening. You pretend to be listening, often responding with an aha or a or a nod, and then you're really not paying attention. Everyone is guilty of pseudo-listening to an extent, but this kind of listening should try to be avoided, as it prevents you from fully understanding information and it's somewhat deceptive to the listener. Aggressive listeners are looking to argue with other people. They regularly try to find chances to ambush their conversational partners. The clear problem with this barrier is that people aren't going to want to talk to you because they don't want to argue with you. Before ambushing a partner, you should first ask yourself if it's necessary and if you're risking being polite. If you find yourself struggling with any of these barriers to active listening, don't worry, you're not the only one, and there are ways to fix it. Why should we try to improve our active listening styles? Well, because listening to others makes them feel valued, and because it involves rather simple steps. These steps include managing your feedback, adapting your listening, and understanding the significance of silence. When you manage your feedback, your objective is to make your interests known. You want the speaker to know that you're listening by responding in an obvious, positive, and appropriate way. Adapting your feedback involves flexibly using the aforementioned listening styles, depending on the situation. Each situation is different and demands a different approach to your listening. It's also important to recognize the value of silence. Sometimes it's more than enough to just quietly listen as a sympathetic ear or a shoulder to cry on instead of interjecting. So hopefully you were able to see just how complicated the process of listening can be. It involves not only hearing, but employing various listening styles, overcoming listening barriers, and constantly working to improve your listening. And with that, I conclude my discussion. Thanks for listening. If you would like to read more on this topic, you can look up listening styles or active listening online, or read Chapter 7 titled Active Listening in the Choices and Connections text.